In this lesson, we're going to take a closer look at controllers. Controllers are used to provide access to our application's behavior. Normally, a URL will be serviced by a controller, and it's going to interact with some service of our application. Now, controllers also interpret our user's input, and they transform it into the model. The model can then be shown to the user as a view. You'll also find other logic, such as data persistence, being performed within a controller. As of Spring 2.5, the main approach to using controllers has been annotation-driven. Spring 2.5 provided some great annotations, such as the controller annotation, the request mapping annotation, the model attribute annotation, and they're all used within controllers to determine how they are going to process our requests. Now, a great thing about Spring's controllers is there are no dependencies upon any J2EE specific classes, such as servlets, and there's also no classes that you need to extend to use a controller. It's fairly simple. In order to understand controllers, we're going to work through a demonstration within our course project. The home.jsp page now has a header, and if we're actually to run our application, so I'm going to head over to the Package Explorer, and then I'll hit Alt-Shift-X and then R to fire off our application. When we hit the home page now, you're going to see a menu or a header across the top of the application. Within this header, there's going to be the option for projects and also resources. If we return to STS, we can look at our home.jsp code, head back to the editor, and we'll maximize this. Here you see that we are including a header, and within that header that is acting as a fragment, we have defined one of our links, and that is the add option underneath the projects dropdown. And if you're wondering what all those additional attributes are, we are using Bootstrap in order to just add some style to our application. What we'd like to have is when this anchor tag is clicked, we navigate to a page that allows us to add a project. If we look at the project_add JSP, we have just that. So there once again we see the header, so we're kind of keeping the theme of our page, and then here's this form that will allow us to add a project. Our mission in this lesson is to map that URL within the header to a controller. And we're going to create a new controller to do this. Let's minimize our header.jsp file. Let's return to our Package Explorer. And within the Package Explorer, I'm going to expand the source main Java folder. And within the MVC controllers package, I'm going to create a new class using the new dialog. So I hit Control-N, I type class, and now I need to provide a name for this class, and I'm going to call it Project Controller. We create this new class, and now the first thing we need to do is define this class as a controller. So we use the controller annotation, and this really acts as a stereotype annotation. Its main purpose is to indicate to the dispatcher servlet's IOC container that this class will serve as one of our controllers, and that makes it available for request processing. When the dispatcher servlet's trying to route a URL from a request to one of these controllers, our project controller class will be a candidate for that routing if it matches the URL of the request. In order for Spring's dispatcher servlet to pick up this controller, we must make sure that component scanning is enabled. And if we look at our dispatcher servlet.xml file, you'll notice that we do have component scanning enabled on this package. When we start our application, this project controller will be created as a bean within the IOC container and available for request processing. So I'm going to close our configuration file. And now the next thing we're going to do is we're just going to add a simple method. We'll call this method addProject, and we'll make it return a string. And the string it's going to return will be the name of our view, so project_add And there we have our controller set up with our method, and these method names that we're going to use for request handling can be very flexible. They can be anything you would like, and you also find the arguments that you provide to these methods are also very flexible. We'll get into that at a later point in time. Now what we're going to do is add the request mapping annotation to our project controller class. So here we're at the class level. And I'm going to import that request mapping annotation by hitting Control-Shift and then O. What this annotation indicates is that this class is available for request processing for a particular path. So we need to define that path within the request mapping annotation. The path we're going to handle with this project controller class is /project. So anytime that's in our URLs, it's going to route the request to this controller. Now the path /project is mapped to the type project controller. But there's a problem here because a type or a class cannot process the request. We need to provide a more granular mapping to one of our methods within the controller so that it can then in turn handle this request. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a new request mapping annotation to our method. For this path, we're going to define it as add. What will happen actually is this new path will look something like this. So it'll be more like project/add, and that is the URL that would get mapped to add project. That's how the dispatcher servlet would see it when mapping the request to our add project method. Then this is going to display our view. Okay, so let's run through this demonstration. Whoops. And we're just going to restart our server. So if you click on the Pivotal TC server, you can hold Control, Alt, and then hit R. That'll restart your server. And once our server has restarted, we can navigate back to the browser, and we're going to hit the context root, just our normal root, and now we're going to click on projects and hit add, and now that's going to display our form that we can use to insert a new project. In order to make that happen, we had to set up a controller mapping, and we used the request mapping annotation at the type and the method level to handle that particular URL that was defined within our header.jsp file. Here we see creating the /project/add URL, and that's mapped to that controller, which then displays that view. We created our first controller there, and we talked a little bit about how controllers function and what their purpose is.